You may not be interested in war, but war is interested in you. Fuck Brexit. You know, I really want a sword or a cudgel or whatever it is, mace. That's communism. Chimpanzee society, baboon society, dolphin society. I have a Redguard Nightblade, if I remember rightly, and I'm a DPS, damage per second.
Oh, yeah. If someone listening to this doesn't know what DPS stands for,
they might think it's some weird porn thing. Chimpanzee society, baboon society, dolphin society. Just you run around and try in a mass group and try and kill people. That's communism. Fuck Brexit. You know, I really want a sword. The Israelis have shelled me. You know, don't worry about me. All the sick memes of really criminal shit was going on there.
And welcome to Mandatory Redistribution Party podcast. Our episode today is going to revolve around our interview with journalist, author and broadcast newsman Paul Mason. Ex-economics editor of Channel 4 News, Paul has gone on to become an author of anti-capitalist books such as Post-Capitalism, A Guide to Our Future, and his most recent release, Clear Bright Future, A Radical Defence of the Human Being. We invited Paul onto the podcast to talk about his recent book, his immortalisation in the form of Jonathon Pie, who I believe was based on his 2014 Bank of England rant, his career as a Nightblade DPS in the Elder Scrolls Online MMORPG, and also to challenge him on some of his past statements on topics such as immigration. And so without any further ado, here's the interview.
I've recently finished reading your new book. You put a real emphasis on trying to find a humanist philosophy that can underpin a pan-leftist struggle. So what, in your words, is the importance of centering humanism?
Look, I think we're going to enter a fairly anti-humanist century. We've got the far right on the move. We've got algorithmic control encroaching on our lives through Facebook and Cambridge Analytica. We're sitting in a university district here in Sheffield. If I wandered into any of these social science departments, the idea that the human race exists would be a contested issue. That postmodernism has taught us that humanity is just a social construct. So at some point this century, a machine is going to say, hey, on what basis do you, the humble human being, demand control over me, the machine, given that I've rigged the last 20 elections? I wanted in the book to try and say, well, if you want to say you're a humanist, and that humanism is like an act of fuck you to the authorities, to people who are trying to control us and dehumanise us, there's got to be a theory of human beings. And so many of the implicit theories of human beings that confront us are anti-humanist. We're already algorithms. We have no agency. We have no freedom. For me, humanism is based in the same teleological story that Karl Marx tells in his early manuscripts, 1844. And he says, look, we're evolved quite randomly as a species that can think, imagine. We're linguists, we're Imagineers, we're cooperators, we're technologists. And therefore it is logical to think that over time we have a story that leads to our own self-liberation. That is what communism was for Marx in 1844. And it was what, I don't use the word communism, I don't like it, because for my generation it suggests the gulag, it suggests that horrible state dictatorship. But for Marx, communism was radical humanism. And interestingly, true naturalism, he said. Now, these are the words of the 19th century. What does he mean? Communism is humanism, is respect for the environment, is what he meant. I think that's a good starting point for the 21st century, for rebuilding a left that wants to go somewhere, because the entire middle bit of my life, has been taken up with the left not wanting to go anywhere, wanting to resist, but to not propose a mega alternative.
And I think that's one of the strengths of the book, is that a lot of Leftist writing is not about positive conception of what to do. It's a massive diagnosis of the problem, which makes you very depressed, and then you finish the book and you have this very pervasive feeling of dread. But it still feels like the way in which you're defining humanism, it's defining it against technocracy, it's defining it against oppression through machines. There's a lot of writing about finding a philosophical underpinning for the humanism you're talking about. What's the essential qualities of humanity that you think?
Well, the number one quality is that unlike all other animals, we have a social history. Mm-hmm. That is, as far as we know, chimpanzee society, baboon society, dolphin society exists for definite, but we don't really know. We can't see a progression in it. There may be little progressions, really interesting social innovations may exist within individual pods of dolphins, but we can study these. My mind is open as to that, but there's no systemic social change. From stone tools to pottery takes us 300,000 years. From pottery to cities, 7,000 years. Cities to democracy, 2,500 years. Democracy to the steam engine, 2,000 years. Steam engine to the silicon chip with 4 nanometers thick, 200 years. That's the source of optimism. If you were looking at that from a massively wide angle, you'd say, why aren't we happy? And the reason is because during those millennia, every form of technological progress for human beings has taken the form of a hierarchical society in which people are oppressed. For me, the qualities of a human being are to do with change, not staticness. They're to do with the fact that as our society develops, we can, and it doesn't go in one direction, we take these leaps and slides forwards and backwards towards freedom, towards the lack of necessity, that is the idea that food, the basic necessities, heat, shelter, etc., can be quite cheap, bordering on free, if we just develop society fast enough and sustainably enough. This was the idea behind John Maynard Keynes' famous essay in the 30s, The Economic Possibilities for Our Grandchildren. He wrote it as a half joke. People take it really seriously now, but it was actually a lecture delivered to pupils at a public school. And he basically said, give it 100 years, we'll have what looks like communism, because compound interest, which was the jokey bit, economic development will create enough that we begin to transcend the economic problem. The economic problem is there's not enough of everything, so we must have a market to distribute it. So if Keynes can envisage, even half-jokingly, a communist utopia, then the communists should be able to do it for real and for serious. And that's my answer to when you say, what's the attribute of a human being? Yeah. The attribute of a human being is to struggle for freedom. That's the essential attribute. I'm sure, a materialist reading of most world religions, all world religions, has to see them as ideologies in which that struggle between hierarchies who are trying to justify their own position and the distribution of wealth, and then human beings who are trying to say, but we want to be free. In the book I write about the Axial Age, which is the period 800 BCE to 200 AD CE, as we now call it. And I think we know a lot more about the material underpinnings of that period, the period of cities plus mercenary armies plus money, plus humanistic religions from, Buddhism, Confucianism, the later Jewish prophets and philosophers, Christianity. I think we can say that all those religions were the product of a particular period in human history where the human being stands up and says, you know what? Not only do we know that we are separate from nature, which is what the Eastern religions had taught us, or the kind of the polytheistic religions. Not only do we know that we are separate from nature and its underling, we have an imperative to fulfill our own humanness. That's what I observe when I read now back, looking through the framing that I've created in this book, the humanistic religious traditions established in that period. To me, that's what humans are, that we are Imagineers and linguists and cooperators and technologists struggling to be free. And that does make us very, very, as far as we know, unique on this planet, and we don't know about the other planets, or indeed the rest of the universe.
I guess as someone who has had a lot of interest in the animal rights movement, a lot of the rhetoric around that doesn't want to us distinguish the human being as this sort of supreme being that has some special attributes. It's true that obviously if you were to encage a creature, it's not very long before they learn to be helpless. But I also kind of think that applies very evenly to human beings. We've internalized a lot of our own helplessness. I guess I'm ill at ease with the idea that we've got some long-running teleology that can lead us towards some kind of predestined future. I think it's equally likely we'll have the boot coming on us forever.
Yeah, I mean that's the reinterpretation of Marxism that Rosa Luxemburg made in her famous phrase, "Socialism or barbarism." It's not predestined that we free ourselves, because the mode of progress is always hierarchical. People look at Marx and they think of he's kind of some mechanistic philosopher of universal progress. He isn't. He's, the first line of the Communist Manifesto is that the class struggle ends either in a new domination or the mutual ruin of the contending classes. The mutual ruin is possible. The proletariat and the bourgeoisie in class society can destroy each other.
After reading Post-Capitalism, where the solution seems incredibly tied up with technology, is this new book a reversal of your position before? I don't see how it's compatible.
No, it is. I mean, in post-capitalism, what I say is that there is a route one to a post-capitalist, that is a non-market society. It's not socialism where you seize the economy, you centrally plan it within a scarcity situation, and you try and make human beings conform to the needs of the central plan. Instead, because information technology is unlike all other commodities in the sense that it disrupts the price mechanism, it makes some things cheap and some things free. Some things should be free. They cost nothing to reproduce. Because it creates vast stores of utility, usefulness for free through the network effect, because it delinks work from wages and blurs the edges between work and non-work, and because it is inherently democratic. If I discover a flaw in a computer program tonight, then everybody's copy of that program is updated tomorrow morning. So because of those four qualities, price disruption, network effects, blurring of work and wages, and democratization, we can use information technology, I argue, to rapidly free ourselves from necessity. And if we decided we're going to use this, instead of creating monopolies whose sole purpose is to make something that should cost 1 penny, 99 pennies, like a music track. Instead of doing that, we pursue cheapness and free utility. Then what you create is a kind of wiki economy. You create an economy in which Apache, Linux, open source in general, wiki-based free information sources, that principle spills over so that you then get the anarchist bakery, the cooperative local grocery, then you get the organic farm in a city run collaboratively, then you get the credit union, then you get a bank like Triodos in the Netherlands that's got about 2 or 3, 4, 5 billion euros of money under management, but does not want to make a profit. That's the post-capitalist thesis. What wasn't there in the post-capitalism book was a theory of agency. Who will make it happen? No, there was an implicit theory of agency. It is the networked individual. It's all of the people exploited by the present forms of capitalism, who, by rebelling and demanding a different form of economic activity and structure, will have to create an alternative to capitalism. At the same time, in post-capitalism, what I was concerned about was the power of monopolies to stifle the economic potential of infotech. In this book, I'm concerned about the power of monopolies to strip our lives of agency full stop through surveillance and algorithmic control. And I started writing the book thinking that was the main problem. And I think it is the strategic problem in the 21st century. But the more I studied the way technology is stripping us of agency and selfhood, the more I realized that the problem of now is the same thing. The eviscerated self that the neoliberal era has created, this performative human being behaving like a machine, is actually the entry-level drug for what comes next, which is when the Chinese state says, these behaviors you've learned in your 20 years on Earth as a market subject to the Chinese population. Well, now we've systematized them into a kind of machine logic, and the machine now runs your life. I absolutely accept that climate change is the existential problem of the 21st century. An equally big problem would be if we lost the Enlightenment. We lost the idea that verifiable thought, verifiable knowledge was a thing, and that instead all knowledge became relative and all truth claims were subjected to a machine owned by the government. It's scarier than Orwell. Orwell's dystopia needed human beings to run it, but I don't think this one will.
I'm going to move on to some much lighter questions.
I thought this was meant to be a comedy podcast.
Right.
I mean...
Well, something I personally have been desperate to ask you is, do you remember in 2014 there was a clip of you going on an unscripted rant outside of the Bank of England?
I do.
And I noticed that less than a year later, an actor called Tom Walker made a character called Jonathon Pie, who's also going on an unscripted rant on the streets of London. I'm so
glad I inspired that meme. If I did,
is that do you believe that Jonathon Pie is based on you?
I think it could be. But let me tell you the story of what happened then. So this was about the 5th bank scandal, and every time you do a bank scandal, you have to stand outside RBS, this ultra posh HQ in London Spitalfields, and do pieces to camera because it's always them. Number one, it's nearly always them. There's a weird thing in the City of London of filming or taking photographs of buildings often brings a security guard out to try and arrest you. Because they work for a global bank with billions of pounds under management. They think that they have the power to sort of call the cops on someone who's filming. Now, on this day, this guy came out and said, "Oh, you can't film the building." No, I was standing on a public place filming the goddamn building. Mm-hmm. And I just said to him, "Look, why don't you turn around, go back into the fucking building?" I'm afraid I didn't say that. And actually ask whether anybody's breaking the law. Mm-hmm. Because I'm here reporting on the biggest crime in your sector that's ever been reported. And I got really mad. The thing was, at that time, Channel 4 was trying to be edgy. Channel 4 News, it was trying to be edgy. And they had this theory that if they did things on the internet, this was the management's theory, if they did things on the internet, then Ofcom, which regulates TV, would take a lenient view as long as those things didn't actually go on the internet. This theory was quickly disproved by that piece because the management of Channel 4, which buys Channel 4 News off ITN, went bonkers. And everybody had to do a retraining course on what the rules were. But the weird, it wasn't just me. I didn't just do it and then put it on my phone and it went out. It was filmed on a TV camera. It was editorially managed. It was signed off by the most senior person I reported to. And they thought, this is great. And then the management was like, fucking hell, what have you done? It was, and there was nothing libelous in it. It was simply my reaction. It was my genuine reaction. I was so angry. I know people whose businesses were destroyed by RBS. There was this thing called the GRG in RBS. What it was designed to do, the bank was fucked. The bank had a lot of bad debts on it. And in order to restore their status, they had to get all these bad debts from small businesses off. So they tried to manage them all to bankruptcy. And I have got friends who, an RBS guy turns up at their shop and they says, your overdraft limit's just been cut from 15 grand to 5 overnight. All businesses run on over. You're dead. And, without going into the details, these guys were very depressed by that. They'd put their lives into their small business. And then the next minute, I'm seeing the security guard tell me, you can't film our bank. Mm. This, to me, it's not the fact that individual people in RBS committed a crime, which they did, and I think they were prosecuted and punished for it. It's the fact that the power system just rests on this implicit assumption that I can't film a building in the City of London. So yes, good for Jonathon Pie. I hate RT, to be honest, so I never watch it.
I think he's off RT now.
What is he on now?
I think he might just be going off the Facebook and YouTube stuff.
Good. If more people got angry, there'd be more catharsis.
No, you might not have been. Jonathon Pie's it's all written by a Spiked Online guy now. It's gone full
Oh no, I know. It's gone right wing, but yeah. Anyway, good. It's quite good to be a meme.
Yeah, it's good to be a meme. Yeah, that'll be the lasting legacy of that moment. This is another really trivial question, but
go for it.
There's a point in the book where you're talking about people using technology who are externalizing their thoughts at certain times, and the example you use is laying siege to a castle in Elder Scrolls Online.
Yes! Good.
And I was thinking, why on earth he brought that up?
I've outed myself as an Elder Scrolls Nightblade. I'm a Nightblade. What am I? I'm a Redguard Nightblade, if I remember rightly. So Redguards are a race. And
I'm well familiar with the Elder Scrolls.
Nightblade, just for the readers, in case they don't know, Nightblades are a particular kind of fighter. And I'm a DPS. damage per second.
Oh, yeah. If someone listening to this doesn't know what DPS stands for, they
might think it's some weird porn thing. Anyway, so I'm a damage per second person. And you know what? I love the collaborativeness of it. I've been on and off. I have these periods where I do have to play multiplayer.
Do you think the collaboration of Elder Scrolls Online is the post-capitalist
No,
dream?
but let me tell you the story. I've been playing multiplayer games since broadband came in, and I love the collaboration aspect of it. For me, it gets serious at the point where everybody's on the voice servers, and there's always some kind of alpha male going, "Fuck you, fuck you, you just fucked up that, you fucked that, you fuck." It's like you think, and you're thinking, and a lot of the American ones have got this fake. So, guys, how are we going?
Yeah. Or if it's not that, you're being called Sika Blyat all the time.
But so I don't use a voice. I don't use voice anymore. I just zerg. I love zerging. You know what zerging is?
From StarCraft.
Yeah. Well, zerging in Elder Scrolls is the same thing. It's just you run around and try in a mass group and try and kill people. I find it quite gratifying, but I get to a point with it and then I just basically drop it. I mean, I'll tell you what, when it was...
Have you been less interested in the single-player Elder Scrolls releases, or are you mainly just an online guy?
I played Skyrim when it came out. Do you know what I really loved about the single-player Skyrim was the music track. It was a superb soundtrack, and I realised that the production values and storytelling of these things were actually really good. I've got friends in the gaming industry who do game design, and they're all trying to move away from that into little twee Shakespearean games.
Yeah.
But I do think that... people might think, I'm a 59-year-old person, that it's weird for me to be taking part in this. But I think it's part of reality. I think there's more storytelling. I don't know if you know, but I have an avatar in Second Life. That is me. It's called Paul Mason.
I think you might be the only person that plays Second Life.
I don't. Well, no, I've never touched it for more than... I think it must be more than 10 years now, but when it first came out, I did a feature on Second Life, and I went to Silicon Valley to talk to the Second Life people, and they made me an avatar of myself.
Oh, okay.
And so I went and I built a little museum to the Paris Commune on my little patch of earth, and then then when all the kind of weird organised crime and sick, all the sick memes of really criminal shit was going on there, I got off it very quickly. But he's sitting there somewhere, this Paul Mason. Of course, he couldn't have any fun. I mean, I realised that everybody has it as some kind of an alternative ego, and they go and do all kinds of really crazy things. But I'm sitting there with my real face and my real name, so I'm just going, hi.
Yeah, you've really come at it the wrong way.
I've come at it the wrong way there. But I think multiplayer games are really... We know what they are, and isn't it weird if I went to the Newsnight's office and said, there'd be one little nerdy guy sitting in the corner who knew what it was. Mm-hmm. But a lot of people claim not to know what any of it is. And so that means they're missing the movies. It's like you've been sitting through the 1930s and you've missed the talking pictures.
It's a pretty wild state of affairs with video games in particular, in that if you look at the figures, they're wildly popular, like 1 in 5 people must play. But in casual conversations, a lot of people pretend they've never heard of it.
Who's
Mario? What's that?
There'll be some good sociology to be written. I was fascinated to find that Yanis Varoufakis was the chief economist of a was it Elite? I can't remember.
EVE Online.
EVE Online.
He's in EVE Online.
No, it wasn't EVE Online. It was some. No, he was a chief economist of a games company in San Francisco in Potrero Hill. So he's a chief economist.
Could be Elite.
It could be. Anyway, he claimed to have been the chief economist. And I'm fascinated by the economics of all these multiplayer games. I mean, obviously, because it's what are we talking about? We're talking about scarcity. These are artificially created scarcities. In fact, I really want a sword or a cudgel or whatever it is, mace, called Bahrara's Curse. Okay, because it's a big, heavy fucking thing that I need to hit people on the head. And of course, what I'm going to have to do is pay some gold. Gold to buy it. But in reality, everybody could have everything. So you've got everybody, as long as a copy of it exists on the server, every player could have everything. And then what would happen? That's communism. When everybody could have all the different swords, shields, recipes, drinks that are in this world for free, there probably would be no fighting, because you're only fighting to accumulate the experience points and the gold to buy the shit. When when Elder Scrolls Online first came out, I designed, with some friends who are anarchists, the idea of trying to form a commune in it. Mm-hmm. And I've got the concept document. And the idea was we would go into one of the player versus player arenas, which is called Cyrodiil in ESO, and we'd just sit there. We wouldn't fight. And we'd form a little village of different people from each faction, because you're meant to kill each other. There's a sign saying, "Hey, this is the enemy. This is how much you've got to hit them till they die." And we'd sit together and form a kind of commune. What happens is, you can, for people who don't know it, you can create items, like you make a bow or a cup or whatever, or a chair, and we give them away for free. Rather than selling them, all the price will be zero. But life's too short to do things like that. And in any case, the killing things is quite a lot of fun.
Great.
And it's a fucking waste of time. That's the other thing. In the end, after about 2 weeks, of binge playing sometimes, I just think, right, that's the end. Go back to my script. Go back to my play, my film script. But I don't know. I think, why do you think people are so enwrapped in the sociality of it?
Of online
Gaming, yeah.
I think one of the big things is not just the anonymity, which people say is why people end up griefing or being mean to each other, but everyone's internalized so many negative thoughts about themselves, their voice, their appearance, every external aspect of their own body. So you can be like, well, I'm just this cat person now and I can jump over a mountain. Who's going to have a go at me now?
As an aside, after our interview, I ended up looking at Paul's jaunt into Second Life. And while footage is no longer available, there are still a couple of pages in a small photo gallery detailing a 2005 Newsnight feature on Second Life. They made custom skins for Paul Mason and Jeremy Paxman, and then invited the public at large to participate in what they called an avatar party. They made a small reconstruction of the Newsnight set, which anyone who could log into Second Life was welcome to access, which wasn't very many people. The instance filled up almost immediately. Second Life servers can only hold about 30 people, and there are enough people logging in to try and access the Newsnight event to cause problems with the global servers. There are some pictures you can find of a low-poly Newsnight set filled with furries and people dressed as mid-noughties goths. And then apparently after a while, a number of people managed to log in using identical soldier avatars, who proceeded to stalk Paul Mason and mime slashing at him with a knife. Please, if anyone could find footage of this interview, DM me immediately, because it sounds incredible. Okay, that's it. Back to the interview.
Before I let you go,
Go on.
I want to address things that have come up in recent and semi-recent politics outside of the scope of the book.
Yeah, good.
So one thing I remember you saying a few years back, which I've remained a bit confused by, is that you made a few statements on immigration that, correct me if I'm wrong, were sort of an attempt to triangulate a consensus regarding immigration.
Lack of consent for free movement caused Brexit. That's what happened. And in a book chapter I've written, in a book called The Great Regression, I tried to explore where that came from. Why was it? Now, a lot of people say it's because it suppressed wages. People say, well, East European migration suppressed wages. It did a bit, and in some sectors a lot. What it did is it squashed the ability of people to get off the minimum wage. That's solvable by labour law changes. The real problem I observed in a place like Lee, where I come from, which is part of Wigan, was the resentment that people had that, first, the bourgeoisie now has 2.7 million people who don't have a vote to exploit. You can't vote in the national election. Next was the classic immigration story they've been told is that people arrive, they accept, quote unquote, our values, whatever they are, but they fit in. Eventually, our values become a bit of their values. So, chicken tikka masala, kebab shops and whatever. That's been the story. The story with European migration was that there was no requirement to fit in. Now, a lot of Poles and Lithuanians do want to fit in. I interviewed a Polish guy who said, I want to join the army. I join your army. I see it as my army. But the existing population only saw it as people with rights but not responsibilities. And I think that was a source of resentment. Now, if I could have persuaded Corbyn during the referendum campaign to say, we'll ask for, or even Cameron, we'll ask for a temporary variation on free movement so that we can set right what we need to set right and then restart it. If I could have persuaded them to do that, I would have. I tried, actually, and they wouldn't have any of it. And so, bang, we lose the referendum. Now, if we go back into the single market, or we stay in Europe or in the single market, we have to accept free movement. It's part of the deal. But for me, That's not a socialist principle. I mean, the European Union is a neoliberal construct. That free movement has been designed right now, and its effect right now is to make labour weaker against capital. I want to get to a situation where there are open borders, but you get there in stages. I also want there to be. I want everything to be free. I want everything in society to be for free. But we need to take steps to get there. In Britain, we're lucky, but also privileged, because the real thing that is driving the far right in the world, which is refugees, they can't get here. If I were to have my way with a policy, it would start like this. I would start with refugees. I would say refugees has an absolute right to come to this country and claim asylum under the Geneva Convention. They, to me, are the people that I want most for our policy to accommodate. Now, what does that mean? If we say there's 200,000 people waiting to come here from the camps of refugees just outside Syria, in Lebanon, Jordan, and in Turkey, we could make labour market assumptions about that. We need so many doctors, we need some nurses, we need to look after their children. Let's accept them. Now, if we did that, I'd also say then, well, in an ideal world, do you need so many people who already live in Poland, Lithuania, etc., to come? I would like to have a programme where migration could be managed via the labour market. Not by saying you can't come into our country. Of course, people are welcome to come in. But ultimately, if we're going to have an industrial policy that says we need 10 new industrial centres in South Yorkshire, we're going to need people. But we need to be able to understand where they come from and try and make sure they come here and not just go into a kind of bedsit on the edge of London for no reason. I don't think there's anything anti-socialist about trying to manage migration. Practically, if we're going to stay in the European Union, which is what I want us to do, we have to accept free movement. We have to mitigate its negative effects for people who already live here, and there are negative effects, and we need to have an argument with people. So I don't take a liberal view on free movement. And when it comes to open borders, though it is my ultimate aim, so is free love. But every time right now somebody says the word open borders, a new person turns fascist, because all they can see is refugees coming without control. A lot of people characterise
Didn't you just advocate for refugees should be able to come in? You said it was like Eastern European workers that you wanted to, but you are advocating for refugees.
I'm advocating for refugees have an absolute right. Economic migrants have a relative right. Now, a lot of people, anti-racists, say, you're creating two tiers of migration. I am, yes, because we've signed the Geneva Convention. If I'm fleeing from Syria, shitting myself that I'm going to be killed or murdered or assassinated or all the kinds of things that can happen to you, and I arrive at Dover and say this, I don't want to be standing next to somebody who says, I'd like a job. I have an absolute right to cross this border. And that is the Geneva Convention. There is a hierarchy of need in movement across borders. The point is to say, if you're starving and you're insecure and you feel that most people who arrive have a mixture of economic and political insecurity. There's two things. Practically, I want us to stay in the European Union or the single market if we can't stay in the European Union. Therefore, practically, I have to defend freedom of movement. We have to do things in Britain that prevent bosses using freedom of movement to say, recruit only Polish workers into a workplace, to hyper-exploit people. That's one thing. But let's detach that problem from the problem of the refugees. That 1 million plus people who came in 2015 to Europe may not be the last surge. That was a geopolitically caused surge. That is, the Syrians bombed their own population and Erdogan turned the tap, allowed them to come across to disrupt Western society. It's quite clear that happened. Next time, nobody may be in control. If we get droughts, famines in sub-Saharan Africa, North Africa, breakdowns of order in North Africa, that's our problem. That's our problem. It's not their problem. It's our problem. We have to mobilise resources to move people out of drought areas, out of areas that are facing famine or civil war or genocide, like in Rwanda. What I'm trying to say is that the British political discourse on migration has been very skewed towards economic issues. That has given us this kind of free pass, which our European colleagues don't have. They have to decide, if 1 million people come because they're terrified of dying, do we let them in? And the Germans let them in. Good. They did it in a chaotic way, and they did it in a way that didn't explain it to anybody. So that's my position. You have to fight what's in front of you. Before the election, before the referendum, what was in front of us was a xenophobia about economic migration that I think the left could have done more to assuage. We could have said, at least we see your point. But many people
But then
didn't
what you're
see the
saying
point.
it was a xenophobia-fueled anxiety about economic migration that surely we wouldn't want to justify. You wouldn't want to say, yes, fair enough, that is a problem. Eastern Europeans are stealing your jobs.
No, I would never say East Europeans are stealing your jobs. In fact,
you never explicitly say it. I just mean if you were to move to... It doesn't sound like if you were to say we will let people in only if they have the jobs or skills that we're looking for within our economy, how is that different from like a points-based migration system?
Well, if we were outside the European Union, I would advocate a skills-based migration system. So here's what I would say is my local tandoori, Bengali owned, wants people to work there. He wants to bring all his family from Bengal. Let them in. They're British. They contribute to British society. That if we were free to do that would be an entirely legitimate thing. You wouldn't simply open the border because you've got a welfare society. You have to be able to say to the people who are contributing to it, on what basis do we allow other people who haven't yet contributed, on what basis do we allow them to access this welfare society? Tourists, yes, obviously. People in high need, with refugees, yes, obviously. Can everybody come? No, obviously. And you lose consent for welfare. If people are going to say, well, everybody comes, you lose consent for the welfare state. But the point is, we're not on our own. We haven't got that freedom. We're in Europe. I want us to stay in Europe, and therefore I want us to accept free movement. I do want us to promote more positive attitudes to migration from the former British Commonwealth, because we have a debt to the people whose grandfathers we put in jail and starved and the rest of it, from Bangladesh to Kenya, to the Caribbean. I want us to... The big problem... Why did 27% of Asian people and 18% of black people vote for Brexit in 2016? It's because they felt, I think, that they weren't being listened to on their migration issues. In the end, it's academic. The Geneva Convention exists. We must accept refugees. The refugees are not running away for economic reasons. They're running because they're terrified. The left has to get its priorities straight on this. Any idea that a refugee is the same thing as someone who quite rightly would like to better themselves, would quite like to move here, is not right. It's just not right under international law.
I get that obviously there is a distinction between someone fleeing for their life and someone fleeing for a better life. That there is a distinction there. I guess I find it difficult to square the circle of one of your arguments you put with the book is that you don't want people to be slaves and metrics towards the economy. But then if you can only come in if you can contribute towards that economy, then you're just plugging people in as modules into a larger system.
You shouldn't only be able to come in. I mean, the refugee comes in whether they contribute.
But outside of the refugee, you'd say if we weren't in the European Economic Area and had to accept freedom of movement, if we were Australia or Canada, you'd say let's have a points-based system, whereas... oh, well, we've got a new factory that needs people in it. You can come in only if you have the skills relevant to that. You're just turning people into economic items.
I'm not the fact is the system turns them into that anyway, and you have to manage a capitalist system if you want to run it. Look at the way Canada operates. Canada, the left in Canada is, the mainstream left, the Labour Party in Canada, the NDP, is critical and at times opposed to the way the Canadian Liberal government has brought in lots and lots of skilled people, but also lots of relatively unskilled people, and the effect has been to create, as far as they are concerned, a downward pressure on wages. So even the Canadian model has its problems, but if Britain was on its own and had a migration policy it could set completely on its own, I would advocate a very progressive green card system that open to everybody in the world, from China to Indonesia to Kenya, blah blah blah. That's what I would do. We would have to honour the free movement commitment. I would be in favour of giving the 2.7 million European citizens unconditional citizenship whenever they want it. So the same rights as citizens, full stop, forever, because they've made a contribution to the UK. The migration policy need not be need not be owned by the right. You can own it and create social justice outcomes by having it. But there is also the question of universality, the universality of human rights. Universal human rights are a thing that I want to fight for. And in particular because the far right sees them as an imposition on native populations. The far right says the human rights of a Romanian guy who's been jailed for a crime that he's committed prevent him being deported. Well, they do. That's what human rights are for. They're universal. Now, in defending the universality of human rights, the fact is that in the Declaration of Human Rights, the Universal Declaration, and in the Geneva Conventions that it embodies, refugees have a privileged status. Universal human rights doesn't give everybody on the planet the right to move across borders yet. One day it will, and I doubt I'll live to see that day. When it does, I'll be fucking ecstatic. But until it does, our job is to prevent the West going fascist. That's our job. The rest of your life, the rest of my life. It is doable, I think, through humane and progressive migration policies. One of the things that really pisses me off is the fact that Britain, by standing back from the European Union now, even though we're trapped in it, as far as the Tories are concerned, we aren't taking part in the actual debates that Europe is having. And only the left, the left groups that I support, Podemos, even France Insoumise, Mélenchon's group, which is seen as an economically nationalist, they've been pretty good on the rights of the sans-papiers and the inward-bound migrants and refugees. Only the left stood for a relatively open Europe. What characterises the centre and the right and the far right and some social democratic parties now in Europe is that they increasingly want to create a fortress Europe. Well, there's no point creating a fortress Europe. It's 500 million people. Apparently, Spain is 10 million people short in 50 years' time because of demographics. We need more people. We need 100 million people. What is it? The OECD says 130 million people need to move from the south to the north in the first half of this century to keep the tax and spend, the fiscal dynamics of the north of the world solvent. So let's manage it. So that's my position. Yeah, it doesn't fit with a lot of sort of knee-jerk reactions. It doesn't fit with a lot of it, but I think it is consistent because I have supported the rights of every refugee, case that I've ever been asked to support. And I absolutely support and have campaigned alongside the European citizens in this country for their full rights. So I don't see it makes me some kind of a reactionary. But I do think the left needs to think, it needs to think honestly about what it says to Joe Blow sitting outside, here in Sheffield. If migration does create stresses, the first thing to do is accept that that's happening and then have an argument with people. Mm-hmm. What I think the Tony Blair generation did is they never accepted it was happening. They said, you're making it all up, you're just racists. The lived experience of a lot of people was that they were not making it up.
So it was the Gordon Brown bigot woman.
Well, I don't want to make a judgment about her, whether or not she was a bigot.
This was why Gordon Brown, one of the big reasons that Gordon Brown lost his power is that he called a woman a bigot while getting into a car. This is the thing that...
Yeah, but no, I think Brown was less culpable. Brown was thinking about these things. Brown was very troubled by working class rejection of migration. Tony Blair didn't even see it. Mm-hmm. Tony Blair's people, the economists who predicted there wouldn't be many people arriving, are the same economists now who say it didn't have any effect on wages. And it had a marginal effect. You can't say it didn't have an effect. The Bank of England has found it had an effect. The main impact was not on wages, it was on the way people felt about migration. And nobody cared until UKIP came along. And as a journalist, I was reporting the early UKIP stuff, and it was frightening, the articulacy of the people who were behind it. They weren't fascists, they were quite normal people. If we'd have at that point said, we see your point, you've got the wrong end of the stick, we're going to do something, let's discuss it, it might have headed some of them off. But all they were met with was disdain. And now a lot of them are racists, and a lot of them are. I mean, UKIP.
Sure. And it leaves us in the mess we're in now.
Yeah.
I guess for my last question, in the outcome of the European elections, you've written a piece for The Guardian pushing for Labour to become a full-throated Remain Reform party. and that's causing you a lot of grief online at the moment.
Yeah, but the Israelis have shelled me. Don't worry about me. I've been in a machete wielding mob in Nairobi. I don't worry about what people say.
Sure,
I don't give a shit. Basically, is my attitude.
Okay, well, I guess my last question is: we're talking about the man on the street. Why is it so important for there to be a political triangulation on immigration to create a consensus? But you're not advocating the same triangulation in regards to with Brexit. You want to push Remain.
Look, I'm not triangulating with the man on the street, the person on the street's views on migration. What I'm trying to do with migration is say that there is an economic and logic, and there is also an absolute right. For me, the universality of human rights means that they are absolute for refugees. Now, when we come to Brexit, we're not in the world of human rights. We're in the world of grubby outcomes. We're in the world of a binary outcome. I now think with Theresa May going, there'll be a new Tory Prime Minister, maybe even by the time this podcast goes out, creates a situation where soft Brexit becomes, I wouldn't say never, there's probably a 10% chance of a soft Brexit if some Labour rebels deliver it. But the more likely chance is that the Tories go for a ultra-hard Brexit and they want to get it through threatening no deal. No deal is a disaster. The Labour movement needs to resist it. The way you resist it is to fuck Brexit. That's going to be my slogan this summer. Fuck Brexit. So within that, I want to be able to have the argument in these working class communities where people have rejected the European Union, that, look, you want more autonomy from Europe, you want more democracy, and Europe for sure takes sovereignty away from you, but all the solutions that are being sold to you give you less sovereignty. What frustrates me is that the inability of relatively intelligent politicians to say this. You want more freedom, but what you've just signed up to is what they said on that documentary. Britain is now a colony of Europe through signing up to a soft Brexit. So if you want more freedom, you've got the wrong thing. We've got quite a good deal that gives us a say. I don't like what Europe is. I think it's a neoliberal construct. I think it's a hubristic project, full of people like Juncker who cannot see the problems that they're creating. Let us, alongside you, try and solve this problem. And above all, because it's now become also a culture war in Britain, a lot of my friends on the left don't want to fight the culture war. Well, my advice to them is what Trotsky said about World War I. You may not be interested in war, but war is interested in you. Sooner or later, somebody will walk into this pub and say, take down that notice. And it won't be fascism. It'll be, guys, like in America, like when you meet the kind of Confederate biking, clans in America with their leathers adorned in kind of KKK weirdness. It will just be that they'll exert a social pressure on you, your liberated society. You'll start to feel it, just like Christopher Isherwood in Cabaret is feeling, even suddenly the guy next to him in the comedy club or in the cabaret has the swastika on their arm. You think, fucking hell, how did that happen? Well, that's going to happen unless we stop this xenophobic wave. And what that means for me is that the progressive majority in British society have to maintain their differences. All the debates, whether it's transgender, whether it's migration, we can have them, but in the end, the progressive half of British society needs to defeat fascism. Otherwise, it will defeat us. And you know what I think is that, I don't know if you remember the Jules Rimet trophy. When you won it 3 times, you got to keep it. That's why Brazil kept it. And then it got stolen by somebody. And, I think that if we defeat fascism twice, once in the 30s, once now, we get to keep democracy. Because that's it for fascism then. I mean, literally, its base is among old, isolated people. And we are a young, connected, networked, liberated people. And I think that if we get rid of fascism again, it'll be very hard for it to come back.
Great. Thank you for your time.
Yay!
That was great.
Good.
Mandatory Redistribution Party was created and produced by Sean Morley and Jack Evans. Our guest for this episode was Paul Mason. Our title theme was produced by Ella Jean. The additional track Robo Bozo was produced by Kevin MacLeod of Incompetech.com. All podcasts are subject to algorithms beyond our control, so if you're able to like, subscribe, leave reviews, or in other ways feed pellets into the machine so that we can succeed, our gratitude will be unending. Thank you.